Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, Aerial Property Advisors, Dime Community Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Avison Young, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, JP Morgan Chase, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development, Lavan Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization, Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott, Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Pulcinelli, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, the Merinkoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
It's called the major, most responsible rezoning in the city of New York, perhaps in a quarter of a century or even longer. Recently, City Council approved the Greater Midtown East rezoning, and today I have the people who understand this project from the planning stage to the legal stage to the effect as a broker on the property and on an owner. My guests, they include Bob Tuttle, who is a senior planner with the New York City Department of Planning, Russ Moskowitz, who's a senior partner of land use and real estate at Stroock and Lavan, Michael Cohen, who is the president of the tri-state region of Colliers International. So how many years of your life did you take on this, Bob?
It actually extended beyond my time at city planning. So the first effort started in 2013, and this is the second part of that. Actually, the second part was really the Vanderbilt corridor. When the 2013 rezoning was stalled and we were sent back to work with the steering committee and look at how we could improve that program, in the interim, Vanderbilt corridor was passed, and we see that that's already coming together with One Vanderbilt. Following that, then a steering committee was formed, and that is what really set the foundation for this.
Let's identify the key points of the rezoning. The district, the locations, what can be done, and so on.
So the district boundaries are from 39th roughly to 57th Street, from Madison Avenue to 3rd Avenue. And what it really allows for is landmarks to transfer their development rights throughout the entire district, which is pretty unique. It's really only seen with theaters in the theater subdistrict. So this allows landmarks to free up their development rights, which they haven't been able to use on adjacent properties that may have been already built.
When we talk about landmarks not only include religious landmarks, we're talking about properties that have a landmark designation.
Yes, every landmark designated site. So that can be nonprofits or for-profits or family residences. Also, the focus of the proposal was really to incentivize new Class A state-of-the-art commercial office space. And then the other part of that is creating this space around and throughout the district at the pedestrian realm and in the transit network that people really want to be in, and that really adds to the value of the neighborhood, especially because we expect more people to be there as more density is allowed. And so we want those people to enjoy that space, and we want the residents that are currently living there to enjoy that
Now,
space.
you also said there is a 20% maximum for residential
Yes, that's correct.
in a building.
So this program is really focused on the commercial heart of the city, and 10% of the city's commercial tax base comes from East Midtown. We want it to continue thriving as a commercial district. It has great access to other parts, not just the subway, but through Metro North and incoming Long Island Rail. So we really do want this to be the commercial hub. And in doing that, we're incentivizing the buildings that take advantage of this program to produce that Class A office space, knowing that they may want to have some mixed use and some residential, but that shouldn't be the focus. And we really want to augment the great space that we have right now with new Class A space.
Michael, as a twofold, okay, you have two heads on this situation. As an owner of office property in the city of New York, okay, and as a broker, how do you see this? What's your thoughts about this rezoning?
So let me start as an owner. I think that the city's Achilles heel is the infrastructure. And anything that supplements the city's coffers and is directly allocated for improving and maintaining the infrastructure is a good thing. It's a good thing for all of us in the city, whether we own property or we just live or work here. So I'm a big fan. As a broker, I would say to you, New York in some ways is unique. 5 or 10 years ago, before all the new construction on the west side, a new building in New York, use the word new with air quotes, was one that was built 25 years ago, back in the 80s. We had virtually no new commercial construction in this town. And we paid a heavy price for it. We have energy inefficient buildings. We have buildings that aren't in the location that is most desired now. East Midtown, still Park Avenue, Madison Avenue, these are our major thoroughfares. And the building stock has been aging relentlessly. So as a broker, I can tell you there is demand for new properties in this town. And one of the reasons they haven't been built in the Midtown core is because if you tore down a building, you couldn't even replace the square footage you were tearing down. So you either left it there and prettied it up, or you did what's being done on a couple of sites, is you meticulously tore off the bricks and you left enough of the superstructure so that you could argue it was a retrofit, and that drove up costs, and it really didn't make a lot of sense.
Where do you see people going to be building immediately? Because I think Bob brought out there are 20 potential sites.
There's 16 potential sites. So there's the corridor in Lexington Avenue, a series of hotels and the like. But I mean, if you think about what Michael and Bob are saying, this is a holistic look. This was a landmark move by the administration. They should be credited for it. It's a long-term view. And as Michael said, 5 to 10 years ago, there wasn't competition. So East Midtown, which was the crown jewel for office construction, was somewhat falling behind. Michael talked about nothing in 25 years. Over, I think, 75% of the buildings in East Midtown were over 50, if not older. So this is a long-term view. People are not just going to knock down buildings right away. They have tenants and the like. But this now gives operators, owners such as Michael, the opportunity to think ahead and to start to reposition the building as necessary. And what Bob talked about is this ability to transfer, to unlock air rights from landmark buildings, which is unheard of. Even in the theater district, which Bob alluded to, very limited. Here you have a wide swath of ability from 37th to 57th Street, where it's unheard of. It had never been done before. So this is a major step. This can actually be sort of a poster child on how to unlock development. But as importantly, circling back to Michael's point, it's going right back into the infrastructure, because that's really what drives this conversation.
Let's explain to my audience how that money goes into the infrastructure. There is a charge for every foot of air rights that are sold, correct? That the city captures.
There's two.
As Michael said in our room, in the green room, a flip tax, which people understand when they're buying a condominium or a co-op sometimes.
That's a different contribution.
Right.
There are two ways that we're primarily going to see improvements in the pedestrian realm. One is direct transit improvements. So there are certain identified areas that are transit improvement zones. Development that happens in those, they'll do a pre-identified transit improvement project, whether that be stairway widenings or access from the street into the platform. There's a variety of projects that have been identified by MTA and DCP. So that's the first, and those are tied to the C of O for a building. Secondly, when the purchase of development rights are purchased, or when, as Michael was saying, a building rebuilds to its overbuilt status, when that occurs, they'll do a contribution into the Public Realm Improvement Fund. And there are a variety of projects that we've identified as likely candidates, but there's going to be a governing group that will consist of mayoral appointees, a borough president, council member, speaker, both community boards in the area, and a civic organization. They will actually fund projects as they see opportunities, whether it be from this list or new projects.
Let's say I own a building in Midtown, and I want to tear it down because my leases are coming up or anything like that, or I could buy out my tenants or so on. Do they have to go to the city for approval to do this?
Not to decant the building, none of that, but they would come to the city really once they're ready to move forward with the project, when they've identified the landmark development rights that they'll be purchasing, identified the improvement, that a transit improvement if they need to do one with MTA. We're really towards the end of that process. But we're city planning, so we're obviously there the entire time if questions arise, but really for the process point of view, we're towards the end.
You know, the major project that's taking place right now, which is providing major improvements, is the One Vanderbilt, which is a huge building which is being built by SL Green, which is going to take care of significant improvements at Grand Central, 42nd Street, and so on. That took them a number of years to vacate because there was a couple of properties, first of all. And as one person said to me, the most expensive tenant to vacate was to buy out the leases for the pubs and the bars downstairs, okay? As an owner, how long do you think it's going to take someone to get the next building planned or to be developed?
So I think that there's a broad range of answers to that question. You have certain sites that will be more readily developable, a hotel, for example, or the so-called Pfizer site, because when Pfizer sells those buildings on 42nd and 2nd and relocates, they'll decamp entirely from the complex, could be torn down or rehabilitated using air rights. On the other hand, you have buildings that will need 5 or 10 or 15 years for leases to roll over. It will have to be carefully planned, just as you would an assemblage buying up a block front of townhouses. It's going to take years. And then at the extreme end, we were talking in the green room about the Durst family, who look generationally, have a development site on 42nd Street, where last year they did 30-year leases. And I infer that it's their intention to pass that site along to the next generation and allow them to develop it.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem of redevelopment is, you have to be able to take care of the leases, buying out the tenants, or when the leases come due. You have to have the financial capability to pay for the costs of closing the building down.
Right.
And not every bank is willing to go into a development type of deal. It's a difficult type of deal, and there's not the money availability. So you need a financial strength over there.
Yeah, and you're going to go dark for a period of time where you don't have income. That's right. You have to have the wherewithal to do that. One thing that Bob started alluded to, but is an important point to make as well, is the city has created this sort of platform to allow these air rights and these transfers to take place through a process not good for land use lawyers, but really good for those who pay land use lawyers like Michael, because the process is much simpler now. Going forward, this has now been established. It's really very straightforward, going to the city planning, working with people like Bob, and the process should be done fairly simple, and you don't have the year, 2 years community input, public review.
So you don't have any more community board
Well, you have a referral system, I believe, but it's not the same thing as the traditional land use process, which is what you would typically have, which is what Grand Central has been doing over the years. Is what One Vanderbilt had to do.
Let's talk about what happened on 46th Street to 51st Street. why that area was carved out on the east side of the street.
So there was a real concern from the residential neighborhood to the east that there was going to be additional building bulk in that area, creating additional shadows. And so as we looked through that, we thought what we can do in that area is to allow them to rebuild to their current status. And so that in itself wouldn't create additional bulk in the area. No, the shadows may be shifted depending on the new type of building, but it wouldn't be more. And so we thought that that was a good compromise with that area to say, this is certainly a commercial area. Everything along 3rd in that area is commercial. We want those buildings to be able to redevelop if they are able to. But we do understand your concerns about additional shadows. And so we think that this was a good place to land at this point. And it can be revisited in the future if need be, but we thought that this was a good place at this current time.
But what you're saying is any of these properties between 3rd Avenue, with the exception of 42nd Street, which goes between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, 3rd Avenue, 37th to 57th Street, can only be limited, can only have a maximum of 20% of the space being residential.
That's true in the entire district.
What happens if you have a residential building in that neighborhood, in that district right now, and you want to tear it down, and you want to build a new residential, a total residential? Are you allowed?
You can use the as of right, the current underlying zoning, and just not use this new East Midtown subdistrict.
But you can't get any additional air rights, is what you're saying.
Under this program, that's correct.
Right.
There may
Right.
be other programs out there, inclusionary housing or things like that. But if you're trying to utilize the air rights and the bonuses that are attached to East Midtown, you have the 20% limitation.
Right, it's very commercial focused.
With regard to looking at it on the opposite side, how do you, as an owner, look at the opportunities? You know, you have a building on 60th and Madison, so you're 3 blocks out of the neighborhood. But if you were, would you change your building?
Well, I think everyone that owns a potential development site within the district is now looking at ways to unlock value, whether it's tomorrow or 10, 15, 20 years from now. There's no question that the city has created a path to additional value. Now, that doesn't mean every building should be torn down. Some of them are built, they are at what we would call today the highest and best use, but many are not. And I think everybody is examining the opportunity that this new zoning presents.
You know, you were talking about shadows on 3rd Avenue. When I'm thinking of Madison Avenue is a narrow street. And if you're knocking down a building on Madison Avenue and you're able to now build how much taller?
It ranges depending on, there are areas where it's 21.6, there's 23, there's 18. It just depends on how close you are.
But on average?
It's really based on how your proximity to transit. So I think in the majority of areas, it's either 23 or 18.
Okay, so what I'm saying to you is something with regard to what you had brought up before about the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you have 2 Madison Avenue buildings, one on the east side of the street, one on the west side of the street, going up there, forget the shadow, you're going to be in dark shadows.
So one thing that we have that East Midtown has that's unique is that Lexington and Madison break the grid, so they add additional streets, which by the very fact that they're there, add additional light and air into the area. We also have fairly strict rules as far as how buildings must be built. Now, the rules in Midtown are different than they are in the rest of the city to allow for the higher buildings and to allow for more flexibility. But the daylight evaluation and daylight compensation, which are the 2 rules that apply in Midtown, are both really about providing the light and air down to the street. We've modified them very minimally just to make sure that they can accommodate the new densities, but that only applies to those buildings that are going to build pursuant to the East Midtown subdistrict.
See, I'm thinking out loud on what Michael was saying, and the office towers that were built on Park Avenue, which is a wide street, many of them are old. I'm not sure. Is the Lever House a full landmark building?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so they can't rebuild on the Lever House, but some of the other buildings, 410 Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, and some of those other properties do not have landmark status. And also you have much more light in there because Park is a much wider street. Was that a thought? Do you see that happening? A good number of the properties over there?
We did look at Park. In our analysis, we didn't find a lot of projected sites or sites that we think are likely to redevelop, but we did find a few. And one thing that we did in that area, since that is such a wide street, is create a new metric for how the daylight evaluation score can be measured. So without getting too technical, it just really allows them to use that full street width to their benefit. So when building, they do have the ability to build a building that uses different design parameters that will still allow a good amount of light and air.
So
into the street.
here's an interesting point. Is losing approximately 1,800 rooms in the Waldorf Astoria with the conversion. The largest portion of the hotel is planned to be converted to condominiums, which is as of right. They can do that. Today, we could use some large hotel in Midtown East. Has that been a thought with regard to that? Because, for example, the banquet space,
Right.
which was lost at the Waldorf, is not going to be absorbed. Part of it's going to be absorbed by the Ziegfeld Theater, which is becoming a catering hall. Some of it may be replaced by the convention center and so on.
Well, there's an interesting discussion about hotels right now, Michael, if you think about it, right? On one hand, you have a moratorium on conversion of hotels of a certain size, and that's obviously to protect those keys. On the other hand, in East Midtown, there's no new hotels permitted, and other than through a special permit process. So there would be a case-by-case analysis. So you have
For my audience, explain what the special permit
The special permit process would be a full land use process where you'd go to the community board, the borough president, the city planning commission, and the city council. And it would be specific to a specific project.
But what happens hypothetically?
So you have
Well, one of the sites which
competing-
has been identified is the W Hotel
Correct.
on Lexington Avenue. They're an existing hotel. What if they wanted to build a larger hotel? Do they have to go through this?
If it's considered a new hotel, they would have to go through the special permit process.
What if they were building on top of the hotel?
I think there's an argument to be made that it's not a new hotel and that they would be permitted.
I think
Now-
the zoning right now says it's a special permit, but
Even
a
for
lawyer
additional
probably could
case?
make an argument.
Yeah,
Is there, in the zoning, is there anything with regard to retail component?
So there are a number of areas that require retail frontage, and that's around Grand Central and along Madison and Lex. Those have been maintained, and some have been extended around Grand Central to continue that retail at the ground floor level.
I'm thinking out loud of the locations. We have a number of 70-year-old, 80-year-old buildings from 37th Street and Madison Avenue going down. I see a large number of Madison and also potentially Lexington Avenue properties, as an area of redevelopment. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think south of Grand Central is probably more prime than north of Grand Central for a lot of reasons, including just the tenancies. I mean, you have long-established tenants on Park Avenue who have 15, 20-year leases. It's known for its institutional clients. I think, and Michael can chime in, I think south of 42nd Street, you start to see a different type of mix of clients.
Right now, when a tenant is looking for space, at one time they would say, I want to be in Midtown. Now they say, I go to Hudson Yards, I go to Lower Manhattan, I go to Midtown, or I go to Greater Midtown East. With all this new potential development, which the city needs, also needs for the financial reason of what we were bringing up before, do you see Midtown East as becoming once again the preferred area?
So that's a very interesting question, Michael. There's no question that the movement in the city has been south and west,
Right.
particularly to the Hudson Yards and to the trades, to a lesser extent, to the Trade Center and Financial District. I think that has in part to do with the commutation patterns of the millennials and the emergence of Brooklyn and Chelsea as highly prized residential neighborhoods which are more accessible to other parts of Manhattan than Midtown. But in my opinion, Midtown is still hands down the king when it comes to transportation infrastructure.
Even though Ross's office is downtown.
We do have a Midtown office.
Okay.
Transportation, both Penn Station, Grand Central, or Midtown, restaurants, arts, entertainment, and I think part of the tragedy...
Retail. No
retail.
question.
I think part of the tragedy has been that Midtown has been unable to transform itself, to modernize itself, to keep up with the needs of tenants, the efficiencies, both in terms of energy use and layout of the new building stock. And so I believe that this change, this zoning change, will be one of several elements that will restore the desirability of Midtown. Restore perhaps is a strong word, but supplement it. It will make it competitive with the other parts of Manhattan that have, over the last 5 years, diverted large swaths of tenancy out of the Midtown core.
And I would add East Side Access coming online.
Absolutely.
Is going to also be a game changer, because when we look at our employees, even downtown, what's their commutation time? The fact that East Side Access will now allow Grand Central and Penn Station and Long Island to all be connected, I think is another game changer, and that will also restore, whatever you want to call it, will make Midtown very attractive to large tenants.
I think, something, it doesn't really relate to the zoning, but what has happened to the city with the new ferry system today has changed the complexion also. And with Midtown, right now the ferry stops on 35th Street, but I could potentially see later on the ferry stopping further up on the area, because, right now they just approved the Astoria ferry,
right,
which is going to stop at Roosevelt Island, going to stop at Wall Street, and so on.
Well, I think one of the interesting long-term questions to address is the subway system, the transportation system, basically was built to get people from the boroughs into the city, and not to get people from one borough to another or to move within the 5 boroughs of the city. And the ferry system and hopefully other things will be developed so that the transportation system becomes more traversable internally. And not just sort of a two-way, either in or out of Manhattan system.
Right. But I think what Russ brought up with what's happening in Grand Central, with the Long Island Railroad, what's happening with the Moynihan Station, with all this additional transportation, it's an important need. When the theatrical zone air rights, that was a specific limitation in the area, and you only had a couple of people who were benefiting over here. Now you're helping the nonprofits, some major nonprofits like St. Bart's, St. Patrick's, Central Synagogue, have money needed for their improvements to maintain the quality of these landmark sites. As I said before, one of the greatest zoning changes that's taken place in New York. And I'd like to thank Bob, who is actively involved in the program, for being here, Ross and Michael, and I'll see you next week.